Good afternoon, you lucky people. Now, yeah, thank you. Do you feel lucky? Good, because that's what I'm going to be talking about for the next 45 minutes, and I'm going to share some secrets with you, and I guarantee that at least one of them is going to work for you. The only thing I don't know is how much luck you're going to have, but even if it's only a little can make a big difference. Here we go. Every journey has a start. I will introduce a little bit about myself as I go along, but basically I'm a medical doctor, spent most of my life working in Africa, but I had a neck injury about 8 years ago, which meant that work couldn't continue. When I was at medical school, there were only two subjects I wanted to do, psychiatry and surgery. And of course, there's a very big difference between the two. And in fact, I started as a surgeon and then I went on to do other emergency work. I would have loved to have done psychiatry, but I'm a little bit dyslexic, and I thought if I had to describe my occupation, it was easier to say that I was a surgeon. But anyway, now, for 8 years, I've had the opportunity to be a mind coach. This was my first struggling person, a lady golfer whose golf was getting worse and worse. The worst thing about her was that she wasn't getting any enjoyment from what she was doing. Golf's a very obsessive sport, if any of you know that. It's also a very punishing sport. And I'd just been away on one of these conferences with Paul McKenna and Michael Neal, people you might know, and Richard Bandler. Yeah, I see some of you nodding there. And I thought, I know exactly what I can use these things for. I was like a kid with a hammer, you know, everything was a nail. So I must have been quite a difficult person to be around. But it fortunately did work, because within 6 months, she got 3 holes in one at golf. And if any of you can work out the mathematics, that is quite staggering. And because she's a rather greedy person, she's had 3 more since. And the last time I spoke to her, which was this morning as I got out of bed, because I should have said, she's my wife, by the way, she said she's not resting until she's got 7, because 7's a lucky number. Now, in red, if you can see it at the back, but what if this first experiment had failed? I wouldn't have done this. I wouldn't have just had the confidence to carry on in this new arena. And I don't know if any of you heard Michael Neal speaking today. Did some of you there? He was the first speaker on. Well, I saw he came past my stand at lunchtime, and I said, I just want to check I've got a story right, because I remember him telling me 8 years ago that the first patient he tried for therapy, it didn't work. She called him up 2 days later, and she wasn't fixed, and he didn't treat another patient for 2 years. And then he got another note from this lady who wanted her to meet her parents and her family, because her life had been absolutely transformed, but she'd forgotten to let him know. So fortunately, I didn't have to go through that painful journey. And that got me an invitation to fly to the States, by the way, to work with some of the world's top golfers. This particular obsession with luck started 2 years ago. I can remember very clearly, the beginning of January, it was freezing cold. It was a Sunday morning, and I had a phone call from Sky News. They wanted to do a live interview at lunchtime. And I was living in Colchester at that time, and I said, I can't guarantee I'm getting into the studios. So they phoned back and they said, we're sending the outside broadcast truck to your house. And we lived down a little narrow street. And I thought, what are my neighbors going to say? Already they were a little bit suspicious about me. But there we are. It was a good break, because if you're in this overpopulated field of being a mind coach or a life coach, you need a bit of luck, and the best way to get your name out is on television. It seems to help. But the main reason for putting this slide up was that shortly after I was interviewed on Sky, I did a workshop similar to this. There weren't quite as many people. And normally I talk about health, wealth, and happiness. The reason why I talk about that is back to medical school days. I had wisdom teeth that hadn't come through. And maybe I wasn't very wise because of that, but the dentist persuaded me to have these teeth taken out under general anesthetic. And when I came round from the general anaesthetic, I couldn't see anything apart from these dancing shapes in front of my eyes. And as my focus came back, I saw that standing in front of me was a nurse with her belt buckle. And I said, "What are those funny squiggles on her silver belt buckle?" And she said, "They are Chinese symbols of health, wealth, and happiness." And I don't know whether it was the drugs, but I mean, I've never been able to forget that. And when I'm giving a presentation, I know that what everybody wants is at least one of those things. And when I say wealth, I just don't mean money. I mean a rich life. It's not all about money. I know plenty of people who have got a huge amount of money and are not happy. And I know many more people who struggle every day, and yet they are happy. And I've seen that particularly in Africa, which is quite an eye-opener. So on this particular seminar, everything was going as it normally did. I was saying, "Who wants more health?" The hands were going up. And I never have a script, as you can probably tell. And I suddenly stopped, and I had sort of goosebumps. And I said, "Is there anybody who would like more luck?" And it took a second for people to react. And then, of course, everybody put their hands up. And I knew that there's something about this word that I hadn't really used before. And I've been using it ever since. The last 2 years has been an exclusive research on luck, what it means from the logical, scientific perspective, and also a little bit from the more mystical or metaphysical side of it. Those of you who have read or seen The Secret and Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, you'll know what I mean, the law of attraction type stuff. So I was on a lucky streak. There was no question at all. And because I guess I'm like everybody, I'm superstitious. If you think that you keep getting lucky and you think, "I mustn't talk about it because I'm going to bring a curse down upon myself." Well, I certainly hope that doesn't happen. But I haven't just tried to use luck for myself. I've tried to use it for other people. And I was working with an Irish poker player. He was a golfer. He became a friend. But he was telling me what it's like to be a professional poker player. And I was amazed from the mind games perspective of it and the huge amount of information that these people have to process. And there are some things about poker I don't like. First of all, it's gambling. And I know that some people lose money, and that is absolutely terrible. But, that's not a moral judgment. I can't stop people doing things. But anyway, one thing led to another, and I had a phone call from this man's partner. And she said, "My partner is really struggling with poker at the moment, and he's got a big tournament coming up. Is it possible you could spend some time together?" And I said, "Well, yeah, of course." But at that time, I was working in Europe on the European Golf Tour, and I was traveling a lot. And he was based over in LA. And whilst this was January, the first time in our diary we could meet was July. And again, I had one of these goosebump things that happened to me. And I just knew this was so important. I didn't have a contract. I didn't have any agreement with this person. I bought a ticket that same day to Vancouver, return. I booked a hotel for 4 days. And I flew to Vancouver, where he was playing in a tournament. And I saw him for 4 or 5 hours a day for 3 days, and just a few days later, he, as I said, he'd never won a live tournament. 3 days later, he did. That's his smiling face. I think if you'd just won $1 million, you would be smiling, wouldn't you? Yeah. Well, his partner was smiling as well, and the thing that I worked on with Chris was his goals. The first thing I ask anybody when I work with them is, "What do you want? What do you want from the work we do together? What do you want for your life? What's the big thing that you want?" And he said, "Well, I'm a professional poker player," which I knew. He said, "I need to make a lot more money, and I need to win a major tournament." And I said, "Okay, well, why do you need to? I know that you've already made quite a lot of money." He said, "Because it's not the money, it's the ranking. We have to have a ranking, and if you're in the top number, you get invited to all of the best tournaments. And also, the legacy that you leave behind that every professional sports person or athlete wants is to win a gold medal or to win a major." And he wanted not only to win his first live event, but his first major. And really the main part of the work that I did with him was on setting the right goal. I said, don't think of money, don't think of winning a major. This is what I'd tell Tiger Woods, by the way, but I don't imagine he'll be asking for my opinion. I would say all of these things are outside your control. You can't control how the other players are going to play. You can't control the cards you're going to get. You can't control the environment in the room, just like I can't control this environment, but we make it work. I said, what is the one thing, Chris, that you can control? And he said, well, I suppose I could ground myself and give my maximum focus to every hand of cards that I play. And I said, that sounds like a good goal, because a tournament like that would be 12 hours a day for 5 or 6 days. That is huge powers of concentration required. So nowadays we would say this is living in the moment or living in the now. But Chris didn't know those words, but he knew that he could control how he would react to each of the cards that were dealt. And that was it. That was about as complicated as it got. So that's secret number one, goals. As Abraham Lincoln said, a goal properly set is halfway reached. Because in my experience, a lot of people, they don't really know what they want. They know what their friends have told them that they want. They know what their family want them to have. But when you're setting a goal, it's got to be very much me, me, me. How many of you, by the way, are therapists in some form? Yes, quite a lot of you, as I would expect. And I'm quite sure your clients will have a similar lack of clarity, as we all do. So goals is the place to start. Set the right goal, and then at least you've given a target for the luck to strike. This young lady, her name is Angelica Hammer. She's one of the top Swedish lady golfers, and I've been working with her for the last 3 or 4 years. And I use her as an illustration for secret number 2, which is confidence. Confidence is, again, as the therapist I'm sure would agree, is often the number one issue or one of the very top issues that people want more of. I've never ever had a client say they want less confidence. They always want more. And you won't find that definition in a dictionary, but it's my definition, which seems to fit. A few nods there. Confidence is something that everybody else has. And I would be just the same. I've been watching these other speakers today, and I think they're all fantastic. There's something in our human nature that makes us look around and think, oh yeah, but they're so much better than I am. Well, we have to stop that kind of internal dialogue, because even if it's true, it's not going to help us get stuff done. Anyway, back to Angelica, who's a very good golfer. She was having problems with her driver. The driver's the big club you take off the tee, and it can get you into a lot of trouble. If you don't hit it just right, you'll be in the water, the bunkers, the trees, everything. And that's exactly what was happening to her around about this time last year, well, June last year. So I had to change her frame of mind. There's no point her being on a golf course and as soon as she's gripping this club, she's imagining where the ball's going to go. So I said, now look, you've got to start thinking good things about that driver. This driver is your bad boyfriend. Far from perfect, gets into a lot of trouble himself, gets you into a lot of trouble, but just occasionally he comes up with the goods. So she said, well, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to go to bed with this driver? And she laughed, and I said, I'm not laughing, because that's exactly what I want you to do. Are you going to do that? And she said, well, I'll think about it. Anyway, I had a text from her 2 days later. I had a text from her about 2 days later, and she said, the driver is not in my bed, but I let it sleep on my chair by the side of the bed. So that was some progress. And the other thing that I did, choose your words with care, I mentioned that I couldn't have her believing that this club was going to let her down like the bad boyfriend. And we were actually standing in the hotel, and her golf bag was between us, and I had my hand on all of her clubs. And I said, well, which is your favorite club here? Which is the one that you know you're really good at? And she touched the sandwich, which is the club you use for getting out of the bunker. And her statistics on the tour, she's probably the best bunker player in the world. And then I picked up the club and I held it, and she looked at me and she said, you know, I just remembered something. I remember that 2 years ago, this was the worst club. And I said, okay, well, what did you do? She said, well, for a week, I held the club in my hand and I said to myself, I am the best bunker player. I am the best bunker player. And then after a week, when people asked me what was the best club in my bag, because people always ask that question, she would say, it's my sandwich. It's the best club in the bag. And then the next week later, when she was being interviewed by people, they would say, Angelica, tell us how you got to be such an expert with a sandwich. Well, the reason she got to be an expert was not by spending more time practice, but by thinking differently. She built pictures in her mind, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and she said what we might say affirmations. She changed her pattern of behavior. And her last drive on the tour was 330 yards, and that is a very, very long way for a lady to hit a ball. Very long way indeed. Now, before I leave the subject of confidence, I would like a volunteer who would like a little more confidence in their life, please. A brave volunteer. There's a lady there who's sitting down. Yeah, come and join me, please. Give her a little warm applause. Can you see me if I come down here? Yeah? I don't want you to break your neck on that. What is your name, please?
Vanessa.
Vanessa. And where do you come from?
From London, but live in Bedford.
You live from London, but you live in Bedford at the moment. What do you prefer, London?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And if you don't mind me asking, what do you do for a living?
I work for an electronics company in aerospace and defence.
Aerospace and defence. Very good. Now, you're not an actress by any chance. Okay, well, you're going to be one now. Because what is something that you would really fear, like going to the dentist or making a speech at work, a presentation, or driving? I don't know. Everybody's got something.
I don't like doing presentations at work.
You don't. She doesn't like doing presentations at work. Why not?
I know my subject, but when I overthink, I start to stutter.
Yeah, she knows her subject and she starts to stutter. And that's because there's too much adrenaline flying around. It's because she's building a picture of all of these faces. They're all going to be snarling, critical faces, throwing things at you, aren't you? And what she wants to do with the adrenaline response, she wants to run out of the door and go home and chill out, listen to some music. But she's not allowed to do that. The other part of, as you've heard, it's fight or flight. The other part of her brain is saying, I hate these people. Let's have a fight, bring it on. Well, she can't do that because she'll be fired. So the third thing, which is the one that people forget, is the reptilian reflex when somebody just freezes. And that's why she starts to stutter, isn't it? Yeah. Now, what do you think you would look like? Imagine you're making your business presentation, your job and your bonus depends on it. What would your body posture be like?
If my bonus depended on it.
Yeah, nervous. What I want you to show the audience now is how you look when you're nervous. You're not smiling for a start.
Usually put my head down.
Okay, just do it. Yeah. So
I tend to smile. I tend to have a cheesy smile when I read.
Cheesy smile. Okay. So you could see even from the back, the shoulders hunched, the head went down, and she bent her knees. She's actually trying to shrink herself up a little bit. And getting back to that Sky News interview that I did, the first question was, they were asking me about the Ashes cricket team in England, and Lorna Dunkley was the interviewer, and I'd already prepared what I was going to say. And her first question was, well, Dr. Simpson, if you were in charge of the England cricket team, what would you do? Tell them to pull their shoulders back? And that was exactly what I was going to say. And I thought, well, yeah, but it's not quite as simple as that. I mean, and then I managed to recover myself. But what was wrong with those England cricketers, if you can watch them, and what's wrong with the England footballers when they take a penalty and they either fall over or they hit the ball over there, is their body language. You can tell by the way they walk up. They don't want to be there, just like you didn't want to be there. So it's posture. And this is what the coaches should be telling them, and they probably are. You have got to walk the talk. This is what the models call faking it till you make it. And this is why I brought my little stick that I hit people with. Don't worry, don't worry. It's from a friend of mine who is a supermodel, and she developed this. It's called the posture wand. And what she gets these models to do is to put the pole like this and then to walk around. Now look, my shoulders can't drop. And because I'm standing erect like this and my head is up, I'm fooling the physiology. The physiology is getting on top of these adrenaline chemicals and giving me some nicer chemicals. So you try this. It's Vanessa, did you say? Yeah, do that. Hook it, that's the way. That's the way. Now stand up tall. Now just imagine now that you are being interviewed or you are making your presentation. Now doesn't she look more relaxed?
A little bit.
Yeah, do you feel better? And this is what my model friend says, it's faking it till you fake it until you make it. You're fooling the body. The body is feeling frightened, but because you're putting the body into a different position, you're getting the better chemicals, the endorphins and things like that. So thank you very much for being such a demonstration. And you're not going to be, now look, before you go, you're not going to be worried about making a presentation again, are you?
I'll try not to.
Did I mention that I'm a hypnotist?
Really?
Okay, you can go and sit down now. Thank you. So that's a simple one, folks. Anybody, and getting back to the poker player, I make my poker players sit very tall and very still at the table, because a lot of them, if you've ever seen them on TV, their posture is awful. I call poker players are a mixture of mathematical genius, surfers, and skiboarders, and adventure sports, whatever, extreme sports, which makes them sometimes quite difficult to deal with. Louis Oosthuizen, he's a golfer. Do you know what he's holding in his hand? He's holding a trophy, well spotted. That's the British Open. It's considered to be the best thing in golf. And I'm going to tell you the curious story of the little red dot. But before we do that, with your agreement, I thought we might have a very short closed-eye exercise which is much easier for me then to describe what visualization is. So put your bags and things on the floor. Don't worry if it's full of money. You can trust me a little bit. Right, close your eyes now. And what I want you to do is I want you to think of a time when you were really, really good at doing something. Now, I know that most of the time you think you're really awful and you're the worst person in the class and the worst person in the company and the worst person in the team, but let's let go of all of that kind of stuff. There has been a time when each and every one of you has done something that made you feel very good. It doesn't have to be winning a major sports trophy or getting a place at Oxford University. It could be something far more simple than that. The important thing is that it was a time when you knew you were really on form. Okay. Give me a little nod when you've got something so I can just gauge how things are going. Well done. Now I want to add a little more detail to that picture that you're painting in your head. Who were you with on that day? What was the weather like? Can you remember what you were wearing? Can you remember the noises? All the different noises, wherever you might have been. And most important of all, where was the emotion centered? This feeling, I guess, of satisfaction and pleasure and pure joy. Where did you feel it? What part of your body did you feel it? Okay, we've added quite a lot of detail now to that picture in your mind of that time when you were very, very special. Now, if you could summarize the way you felt in just one word, not two, not three, just one word, what word would you choose? Give me a little nod when you've got it. Good. Questions are getting harder. And if this one word had a colour, what would the colour be? What would the colour be? And give me a little nod. Okay, we're almost at the end. Keep your eyes closed. Now just post a question into your unconscious mind. How can I use this word and this colour to remind me in the future when I need to recreate this feeling, when I'm doing my driving test or making my presentation to my company or whatever it might be? How can I use this word and this colour? Okay, now you can open your eyes. Yeah, you feel okay? You look a little sleepy. Nice rest. And the curious story of the little red dot was that his coach took him through a very similar exercise, and the word that he felt was probably something like focused, and the colour was red. And on his golf club, he put a big red dot. That's why they call it the curious story of the little red dot, because he had decided, just like the poker player, he couldn't control what was going on with the golf course, with the other players, or even really his own luck, but he could control his focus that they call the pre-shot routine in golf, making sure he's ready, standing in the right position before his shot. And when he looked down, the last thing he would see was this red thing on his glove, and that reminded him of when he'd played the best round of golf. So against all of the odds, 4 days later, that's him holding up the trophy. So that's another example of how you can increase your confidence and your good feelings. And that's, of course, is visualization. And I mentioned The Secret before. There are 3 words in The Secret that really summarize the whole book, in my opinion. That's thoughts become things. The chances of you achieving anything in life, if you can't see the picture of what it is that you want, are going to be testing luck to the extreme. It would almost be like a coincidence. But if you have a very clear picture, as I've described, of what you want, and you put it into your unconscious mind with your eyes closed, that is going to definitely help. This is another poker player. It doesn't matter, it could have been anything, I'm just using examples. Liv is about the top lady female poker player in the world, and she came to see me because whilst she'd had a very successful career, this was back in this same January 2014 period when the luck thing started to kick off, her previous 12 months had, by her standards, had been very poor indeed, and she was struggling to keep her sponsorship levels and her position on the world rankings. And again, our first chat that we had together, a lot of other stuff had been going on in her life in that previous year, and we talked a little bit about it. And it became very clear from just watching. I heard Paul Boris's presentation. I don't know if any of you did, but he said you have to be a watcher. You have to listen. Listening is so important to therapy. And really, her hands told me the whole story. She was very upset by some of these unfortunate events. So then I knew that I had something to work with, because peak performance, which is what we all want, peak performance comes from living in the moment, living in the now, living in the present. There's only 3 aspects of time that we know of at the moment. There's the past, the future, and the present. Where do you think most people spend their thoughts? The future? Yeah. Some people said the future. Some people have said the past. And probably the place where we aren't is where we should be right now. None of us can change what happened to us 10 years ago, even how bad it could be. We can't change it. But there are ways that we can start to change the way we think about it. There's very little point thinking about the future. Problems happen when sports people start rehearsing their winner's speech. That's the kiss of death. That's what happened to Tiger Woods. When Tiger Woods he started saying he wanted to get the world record for the most victories, he's hardly won a tournament since. But the moment is where people, great sportsmen, great successes, business people, great achievers live. And that is what people now call mindfulness. So a suggestion to be more mindful. Our brains can only handle 7 bits of information at any one time. There's never been a generation like our generation that tests those limits to the extreme. All of us have our phones, we have our texting, we have our breaking news, we have our emails. When people go on holiday now, they feel as if they have to check their emails every day because they're so frightened of what might be going on. I mean, 20 years ago when we were on holiday, there was no way that anybody would get in touch with us. But now the idea of a traditional holiday is almost gone for many people. So that's what I call defragmenting your brain. When you're working on any task, the best way to stay in the moment is to switch off all other things if you can. Like if you're preparing a proposal or for your company, that is going to probably be the most important thing you're going to do that day. So while you're working on that, switch off all these things that make pinging noises. And I know from previous audiences that I've spoken to, they said, oh, if you just know, I have to get the kids their breakfast, off to school, I have to do all this, sort out my husband or my wife, and then I can go to work. I'm exhausted before I even start. And it's definitely true that people's lives are tough. But even if you can go some way along that road to defragmenting your brain and restricting the amount of information that you're trying to process to as few things as possible, because just as Vanessa was saying, there are these 3 responses: fight, flight, or freeze. That's what happens. And it definitely will not allow us to get into the zone where our peak performance lives. Secret 5 is the 3 H's. Anybody know anything about havening? Just a few people at the back. Anybody know anything about heart math? The same people. Not very many at all. Anybody know a little bit about hypnosis? More people. Well, havening, I didn't know anything about it until about 3 years ago when Paul McKenna here, he asked me to be a trainer on this conference. He'd just brought the concept of havening into the UK. And I said, well, I'm going to find it a bit difficult because I don't know anything about it. He said, oh, don't worry, I'll explain it all the night before. Well, havening is something I don't have time to explain now, but it's well worth you looking on the website. It's definitely going to spread all over the world. It's a very simple technique that you can do on yourself, that you can do with other people. You don't need to be a doctor. There are some trainings that you need to be competent, but it's not a difficult technique. And quite frankly, most of you can probably do it already, because what does a mother do to a child to soothe it? What do you do to yourself to soothe yourself? This again, as far as I'm aware, is a reptilian reflex. And there's a lady with her baby there, and the baby's loving it, isn't she? Isn't he or she? Heart math, this is this diagram here. A lot of Olympic athletes are using heart math. Heart math is basically a breathing technique that increases the communication, the coherent communication between the heart and the mind. It used to be thought that the brain controls everything. Now we know that even just around the nerve, there are so many nerve cells that are going up to the brain that are controlling it. So if you can get the head and the heart doing the same thing, that is going to help you to find the zone. And these wonderful diagrams, they show the energy that surrounds all of us. Scientific machines have measured all this, and you can see the center of this energy is the heart, which shouldn't be too surprising because pints and pints of blood are being pumped through the heart every single minute. And hypnosis, again, I don't have time to even begin to explain that, and you can ask any hypnotist and they will tell you different things about how or why it works. But to me, these 3 things are connected, and they're connected with these energy fields here. We all use different techniques, but the result is we somehow stimulate this energy that surrounds us, and that allows our brain to relax, and I think that it makes us fitter and healthier. And I mean, even if we can just reduce the stress levels that we all suffer from, that is definitely going to make us healthier people. And all of these things, by the way, these are the logical things that are going to allow luck to come to you. Because if you don't do, these are the foundations, the building blocks of being a luck magnet. Okay, secret. This is very logical. I don't think anybody's going to argue with any of these things. Somebody earlier today said Richard Wiseman has written a book about luck, and he did about 10 years ago, and it's a really good book. I've read most of the books about luck, and I didn't particularly like them. There was nothing wrong with any of them, but I thought they were just trying to say that, luck is just a variable result. It's an outlying result, and there's really not too much point in even thinking about it. Well, I do disagree with that, because I think there are things that you can do to build your luck, which is what I've been talking about this afternoon. Basically, Richard Wiseman and others have studied lucky people, and they find out that there's a definite characteristic of lucky people. They are extrovert, they network, and they come to events like this. So already you've identified yourself as a person who is more likely to be lucky than somebody who stays at home. Open minds. Yeah, you don't have to believe anything here that anybody said, but the important thing is you have to be open. Let your unconscious mind decide over the months or even years to come what you can take away from events like this, what you can take away from the various people that you've met. And it'll only be a fraction of everything that you've seen and heard, but it just might be a very important fraction. People who are very successful in life, they do prepare. This is not a shortcut. You still have to do the work, but you have to do the work in perhaps a more skillful way. The enemy of the best is the good. Successful people are not happy with being good. They want to be the best, or as near to the best as they can be. And this last characteristic is perhaps the most important. It's the way they handle adversity, because successful people, they don't just go from A to Z and it's just climbing a fairly easy mountain. It's a much rockier journey than that. The journey is so rocky for most of us in life that there are times when we think we have to give up, that this isn't just going anywhere. And many people do give up. And often it's only when they're so close, if they just carried on for another month or two, they'd have got there. So there's a quote here from a Roman poet: "Adversity has the effect of eliciting talents which, in prosperous circumstances, would have lain dormant." In other words, if you're never tested, you're never going to find out what you can handle. I'm going to go really quickly through this. Basically, Dr. Temeshok, I think she's from the University of Maryland. She works with people with cancer and HIV, and she's identified through her book, which I can't remember the name of, but if you Google her name, you'll find it. If I have cancer, I hope I never will. I definitely will be reading her book again and deploying all of these things, because these are the people that survive. They're realistic, they have a fighting spirit, they change their lifestyles. There is no point not changing your lifestyle if you've got a life-threatening illness. Okay, that's enough for that. And secret number 7 is magic. Magic, the power of apparently influencing events by using mysterious or supernatural forces. And here we have the struggling golfer, who also happens to be my wife, because really, quite honestly, I can't think of any other definition to describe how she managed to score 3 holes in one in 6 months and 3 more since. I don't even know why she did that. I would have rather she used that luck and have won the lottery. That would have been far more useful to us. And in fact, it actually cost me money, because every time she had a hole in one, I was expected to buy the drinks for everybody in the golf club. And so she wasn't the kind of coach that I particularly want to attract. Now, I'm not going to bore you with Einstein's theories and stuff, but all that I've learned about science is that the very top scientists, living and dead, they don't know a lot about some of these things here. and Schrodinger's cat and quantum theory, how results change the way you observe them. People who, Oxford University professors, you should listen to them, not me on this subject, but I will tell you that they'll say some things that will sound absolutely crazy to you. And a very good quote here, the only word that's highlighted in yellow in my presentation, because I think it's the one word that actually brings all of these ideas together, and why some people are lucky and others are not. And this definition comes from Alexis Carrel, and I like it particularly because he's a surgeon, and his work, although he won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1912, and yet his work on joining blood vessels is still relevant today. But not only was a surgeon, he was obviously a philosopher, because he said, intuition comes very close to clairvoyance. It appears to be the extrasensory perception of reality. And what is intuition? People talk about gut feelings. They talk about feelings in their heart. They talk about goosebumps. We all have ways. And they say, we just knew this was going to be. We pick up the phone the same time the other person is calling us. To me, it's because somehow we've managed to harness our unconscious mind using all of this kind of physics maybe, I don't know. But people who are intuitive and who trust their intuition, it doesn't always work, but it often does. And for a therapist, one notices it straight away. One does become very intuitive. And as I mentioned earlier, it comes from listening. Very often your client will tell you, or their body will tell you, almost everything you need to know. And your unconscious mind, it joins all those dots together, and hopefully it comes out with a solution that is something that the client can buy into. So intuition to me is very important. It's particularly important when you're working with poker players, as I do. I work with some of the top professional poker players in the world. This is not a career I've chosen. I know very little about poker, but as I say, there are times when one has to be lucky, and that seems to be something. Well, there we are. There's a few little, because people always ask me, they say, okay, you're here, you're talking to people about luck. Have you been lucky? I mentioned, yes, I have. I've been very lucky. That audio book there was one of the first things I did in 2010 in my new career, and it was the #1 seller in the UK. And it was a good boost. If that hadn't happened, I may not have continued. This is my final presentation. I do have a meetup group in London. I have a stand just outside here, stand 121, and anybody who buys a ticket today, it's half price. Normally it's only £10 anyway. Our next meeting is in March, but even if you don't want a ticket, do take one of those leaflets, because I'd love you to sign up for my meetup group, because that way you will know when I have my meetings. And they're always priced very, very inexpensively, because I'd rather have 100 people than 10 people. So I do have 1 or 2 minutes for questions. So if anybody's got a burning question they want to share with us all, now is your opportunity. No? Well, I'm around outside anyway for the rest of the day and for tomorrow. I would really like to thank all of you for being brave and coming to this whole event. I would like to thank you particularly for coming to my session this afternoon. We've had to really race through stuff, but trust me, your unconscious mind may be able to digest this better than your conscious mind. So I hope you think you've got something from it. I'm around for today and tomorrow. Please come and chat to me with any questions or comments. Thank you very much.